Before I foreshadowed some questions about the use of permanent stays. Is this working? I foreshadowed some questions before lunch about the use of permanent.
Make sure that microphone's working. Thank you, broadcasting.
I foreshadowed some questions earlier before lunch about the use of permanent stays, and particularly the case of GJL and the trustees of the Roman Catholic Church, GLJ, and the trustees of the Roman Catholic Church, which is before the High Court. First of all, has the department been briefed upon the issues in relation to the use of permanent stays by institutions with a history of historic child sexual abuse?
Senator, my colleague might have more to add, but we are aware of the issue. It has been come to our attention. We're aware of that particular matter that you refer to as well. The court case currently before the High Court.
Yeah. It's not just GLJ. It's now been repeatedly used in jurisdictions across the country, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, and is being used by institutions like the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, to say to survivors of historic child sexual abuse, when they come forward and bring a claim, that while the institution can no longer defend the extension of time application, they're now using exactly the same arguments to seek a permanent stay and prevent survivors of child sexual abuse from seeking fair compensation. And we are having history repeat, aren't we? This is exactly what happened before the Royal Commission. And instead of extension of time applications, we're now getting permanent stays.
Aware of the recommendation of the Royal Commission, obviously around the time issue and the work that was done by all governments to make sure that argument couldn't be made, and I'm aware of the use of this argument that you've referred to. So yes, we are aware of it.
What are you doing? There's a reason we had a national law reform project, because it was so obviously wrong for institutions that knew about abusers, moved them around, had a dreadful history of allowing the sexual abuse of children in their institutions, to use the arguments about extension of time to shut down claims. But the exact same arguments are now being used on permanent stay applications. The exact same considerations. The perpetrator has died, we didn't take records, we're just relying upon a child's version. The exact same arguments are now being used against survivors on permanent stays. What's the attorney doing about it?
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. Picking up on what Ms Harvey was saying, we are certainly aware of the case before the High Court, as is the attorney. It is something we're monitoring, and we will look very closely at the judgment from the High Court following the hearing, and provide advice to the attorney on implications for both policy and legislation, noting there are clearly state and territory issues here. This work, of course, Senator, builds on past actions under the national strategy, which we can talk to as well if they're of interest to you.
Well, by all means, talk to me about the national strategy.
I might ask my colleague, Ms Kilpatrick, to talk to some of the key actions relevant to this particular issue.
Thank you, Senator. Rebecca Kilpatrick, Assistant Secretary, National Office for Child Safety. So the National Strategy to Prevent and Respond to Child Sexual Abuse was a key recommendation from the Royal Commission that you've referenced. It was launched by, or is agreed by all Australian governments, launched in 2021. It contains a raft of measures, 62, a number of which are focusing on supporting and empowering victims and survivors. Very happy to speak to you about some of those particular measures. They include ways in which we're supporting the sector to be able to provide supports for victims and survivors, so building their sector capability in terms of community and specialist supports. We're setting up a single point of referral so that victims and survivors are able to more easily navigate the system when they're looking for supports. And again, the Royal Commission found that that was a key part of their ongoing trauma, was being unable to navigate the system, so setting up a single point of referral to help them to do that. There's a couple of measures that the NIAA is leading, which go specifically towards supports for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and leading into healing for them. We're also increasing supports for non-offending family members of child sexual abuse offenders, setting up a national support system for them. There are other measures, very happy to go into those, Senator, if it's helpful.
Do any of this relate to policy response to permanent stay applications?
They speak more generally, I think, to the efforts that all governments are undertaking to support victims and survivors of child sexual abuse coming out of the Royal Commission. I think, as my colleague said, we're certainly aware of the issue that's been currently before the High Court, watching it keenly to understand what the policy and legislation implications are, and then we'll be able to provide advice to the Attorney from there.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ms Kilpatrick, the hearing date, Senator, is the 8th of June?
Yes, set down for the 8th of June.
Well, I've met with victims and survivors who have come to see me and told me that, just like happened before the Royal Commission, they are going into settlement discussions, having filed proceedings against these abusive institutions, and being told at the outset of settlement negotiations, you can't win this case. We're going to apply for a permanent stay. You'll never see your case run in court, and we're going to shut your case down. And even when they know the abuse happened, even in some cases where the perpetrator has admitted to the abuse and has been put in jail for the abuse, and they're being told to their face by lawyers for churches and other institutions, you can't win this, we're going to apply for a permanent stay and you're going to get nothing. So do you want to take $20,000 or $10,000 and sign this deed of release? That's exactly what happened before the Royal Commission. And it's happening day after day after day in courts and settlement rooms around this country now with survivors. And you're telling me there's no policy response coming?
No, that's not what I'm saying, Senator. I'm saying that there is a matter before the High Court. We're watching it closely and we will provide policy advice as a result of the judgment from the High Court.
Well, is the Attorney intervening in those proceedings to try and defend the policy outcome we got from the Royal Commission that empowered survivors and disempowered abusive institutions? Is the Attorney-General in there saying this is wrong?
Is he intervening in the High Court matter?
Correct.
No, the Attorney is not intervening in the High Court matter.
Does the Attorney agree that this is wrong? Do you agree that this is wrong for these institutions with a sorry and brutal tale and history of abusing children to be able to use permanent stays as a standard weapon to prevent cases getting into court? Do you agree that that's wrong?
Senator, I'm not going to make a policy comment. What I am going to do is reiterate the fact that there is work underway. There is a High Court case on this matter now, and it's an issue that we are very closely engaged with.
Secretary, has the department provided detailed policy advice to the Attorney on this matter with a set of options for how to fix it? Or are you just crossing your fingers and hoping that the courts will magically fix it for you?
Senator, I don't agree with that type of characterisation. Mr Collette has set out how we will approach providing advice to the Attorney-General. I don't think it's inappropriate to wait for a High Court outcome in a matter to provide guidance, and we will work quickly to consider that and provide advice.
Well, was consideration given to intervening in the High Court? Because this is an issue that affects every single jurisdiction in the country, and it's an issue that previously the Commonwealth Government showed leadership on in calling a Royal Commission. Where's the leadership from the current Attorney-General on this issue? Did you provide advice about intervening to show that kind of leadership?
These issues are considered. The Attorney did not decide to intervene in this matter.
Was consideration given to intervening in this matter?
These matters were considered.
Was consideration given by the was advice given to the attorney and was consideration given to intervening in this matter
Consideration was given.
by the attorney
Well, I can't. As in, we provide advice to the attorney.
on the question of intervention?
I'd have to take it on notice.
Yeah.
I'd have
Sorry.
to be specific.
I'd have to take it on notice.
Has any institution made representations to government on this issue? Has there been any representation or meeting between any institution and government on this issue?
Not
Not that I'm aware, Senator, on this specific issue. We do meet with a whole range of stakeholders in this space on a very regular basis. I don't recall one of my colleagues' specific representations on this issue.
But look,
What about the Catholic Insurance Office?
We'll take that on notice in case it has been raised in the course of consultations, because there has been extensive engagement with a whole range of groups through engagement with the national strategy, but in other circumstances. So I would like the opportunity to be able to check that it hasn't been raised with us.
Can you also check into, when I say institutions, can you include the Catholic Insurance Office,
Yes, Senator.
which has a very significant financial interest in this? And could I also ask you to check for the different denominations and elements of the Catholic Church, including not least the Maris brothers, who are repeatedly using this in order to prevent any kind of fair compensation to survivors of child sexual abuse?
Yes, we can do that, Senator.